Good evening and welcome to Virginia's Views and Vibes. I'm your host, Ginny Gardner, and my guest this evening is Brandon Fischella. He is a military historian, plus he's on YouTube, followed by about 200,000 followers, Brandon F. on YouTube, and he wrote a book, Something Like Philosophy. And where can we get the book?
NativeOak.org is the best place to get the book because that's where I make the most money. You can find it on Amazon too, though.
Amazon or NativeOak.org.
Yes.
One of those two places. Welcome. And Something Like Philosophy. Okay, you have to explain the title.
Yes, it's a little bit of a weird one, I think, for a military history piece. But I'll explain a little bit what it is. It's an anthology series, a symposium, as I like to say on the title. Makes it sound fancier. The basic idea is that it actually features 8 different authors. Myself, I'm one of them. We've all written articles on a variety of different topics, all around a central theme of privation, of suffering, of trauma and horror. Wow. So all the worst bits, basically, throughout military history. The entire idea behind that, then, is to help the reader draw connections across military history to better appreciate, you might say, the human element behind it all. Yeah. I find, especially as I make like lectures and little mini amateur documentaries, if you will, on YouTube, I find that a lot of, so we tend to look at military history in a very insular way. We tend to look at, World War II is this little bubble. And we focus on the weapons that they used and, what all the different leaders were saying and how Army Group South moved up in this hill and took the position, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And same thing with the American War of Independence, the Civil War, even modern-day military history. We have this great obsession with the weapons that are being used and the tactics that are being employed and such. But when we focus so overly much on those material element. They are important. They're very important. But it's easy to lose sight of the thing that ultimately connects it all, which is it's the human element, right? It's the fact that at the end of the day, regardless of what the conflict is, how it's being fought, why it's being fought, it represents a distinct form of human suffering, right? War is hell, right, is the classic saying. So the entire point of the series is that we get different individuals, different voices to write on a wide variety of different subjects with the overall theme of the human element of the misery, of the suffering of warfare. So this first book, for example, it has contributions ranging from a massacre on the frontier during the American War of Independence, all the way up to the sort of environmental difficulties, the environmental traumas of the Arctic convoys of the Second World War. And again, the entire point, the hope is that when you have all these disparate stories that we might think of in their own little bubbles, but you read them all together, one after the other, we might draw parallels between them and better to appreciate the humanity behind it all. So you asked about the title.
I did, but I just want to comment quickly. I think when you look at the military piece of it, and we all know on the History Channel or wherever, in books we read now especially, you're right, the focus is on the battle, the time it started, the airplanes, the tanks.
The timeline, just going down the checklist.
Yeah, and then you may or may not see a scene with people being fighting and being killed. But I think what's often is left out is exactly what you said, the human piece, which is when somebody comes to your door with that flag to tell you your loved one has died, or the mother that has to bury a son, or the wife that has to bury your husband. And I find that incredibly sensitive.
Yeah.
And I'm honored that you're on my show to share this. But I want you to continue, but I just had to say that.
No, I appreciate that. So the name, Something Like Philosophy, again, I acknowledge it's maybe a little strange at first, but there is a reason for it. And I like to think that it reflects the mission of the book, perhaps better than I could ever explain it in my fumbling manner. My own article in the book is about a skirmish during the War of 1812, leading up to the Battle of New Orleans. So just a little tiny, it's the sort of battle that doesn't often get mentioned in the history books because it's a sideshow. It's a little affair compared with the Battle of New Orleans, a big to-do, right? That's the exciting bit that we want to get to, you know, in the movie and whatnot.
Yeah.
But it's a skirmish in which a young British officer, a 19-year-old lieutenant, his first time to America, he loses a friend in this skirmish. It's a particularly bloody skirmish. It's fought at nighttime. It's very confusing. And he describes, first of all, how when the news is brought to him that his friend Gray is his name, when his life was lost, how the moment hit him like a thunderbolt, or it was thunderstruck by it, something along those lines. And how he goes from body to body after the fact, looking for his friend. And as he's doing so, you know, he's a young British soldier, a child really, 19, teenager. But he's from the early 19th century, and so he's sort of imagining that when he comes across the body of his friend, he'll be able to deal with it with something like philosophy. He might perhaps espouse on the glory of the moment, of the heroism of the sacrifice, the zeal for, et cetera, the ideas we like to dress war up with, right?
Yeah.
But while he's thinking through all those things, when he actually finds the body cold and pale on the ground, he just breaks down and he cries. He collapses and he weeps over his friend like a child, are his exact words. And I think that moment really just perfectly encapsulates, you know, what the book is trying to get across throughout all of military history. That while it's so easy and unfortunately common, I think, in especially like military history buff circles, it's so easy for us to look at it with that something like philosophy.
Yeah.
The heroic charge and the, you know, fighting for whatever cause we want to get into, right, for America or freedom, whatever. It's so easy to get into all those, but at the end of the day, when you find the body, you know, it's a friend, it's a loved one, it's a person. And, you know, even if they were fighting for, as, you know, if we look at an individual and we think, oh, well, they're fighting for the wrong side, at the end of the day, it's still a tragedy. Right? In one way or another, it's a tragedy.
I like that you bring out the human side, because quite often we look at it strategically.
Yeah.
Each battle is like a game of chess to some degree, and very strategically. And when you said, particularly when you said skirmish, I thought, how would you describe, although everybody knows it, the Battle of Lexington and Concord? We know that, and you've done that reenactment, which I hope we talk about, that it was right on the green. And one of the people that died, they were on the green, and his house is across the street, and his body had to be, well, he was still alive, I believe, crossed the street and taken to his home, where his family was, and he succumbed to his wounds. And I think, when I hear that, when we go there and I hear that, I think the same thing. You're fighting. You're in two different worlds. You're involved in a battle, and then you're taken home. It's so, I guess, it's hard to put the pieces together, and we do. We look at it strategically. That battle led to the next battle.
Exactly. And then from
then
there
the
it
next
led to
one.
an occupation and a siege and another battle, and it's so easy to get caught up. I mean, you mentioned earlier, I don't remember what exactly you mentioned that made me think this thought, but anyways, you know, like Napoleon said something along the lines of, I spend 10,000 men a day or something like that. You can't beat me, I spend 10,000 men. Because, I mean, whether it's that individual on Lexington Green, or if it's the shot heard around the world, or it's so easy. We look at the numbers at the end and the statistics and how it changed things in the future, and on and on and on. And yet it's so easy to forget that each one of those numbers was a person who
right.
Maybe they were brought
yeah.
home right after the fact, or they never got to go home, but
Yeah.
there's a household waiting for them.
Yeah.
And beyond that, of course, it's, it's not just their loss of life, but it's the household,
It's
how
a
they carry
trickle
on.
down.
It's the next generation that deals with that
Yeah.
trauma as well. It never really goes away. It
Yeah.
just gets, the, oh, I lost my thought again.
That's
I
right.
apologize.
Well, you mentioned a couple things. Dress for War, the human side, and I thought you brought me to think about what we do on Veterans Day or Memorial Day, and we stand in front of graves and gravestones and monuments, and we play patriotic music as we should. I'm not saying there's anything wrong, and we see the names, but those names carved in there, maybe they represent to us a battle, or but they're real, like you said. Skirmishes is still death.
Yeah.
War is still war, and it took me back to that as I'm standing in front of those, and even at the cemetery, you see the flags on the stones of the veterans, and it's just what you bring to this is just so different than we have pictured war to be.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, and I wish I wrote them all down, because you said you look at it from a human point, but you listed the categories.
Yeah. So I think that an important part of a project like this is that it needs to be varied, right? I could sit here or write, as it were, endlessly, right, on and on, talking about how, death is a horrible thing. Death is a horrible, war is hell. But after a while, we're all familiar with those lessons, right? We all know that logically.
Yeah.
But I do find that, when we hear a phrase like war is hell, or we think of sacrifice and whatnot, it tends to be in very specific lenses. A lot of times we'll think of it as being perhaps the Vietnam War, the Second World War, the modern operations in Iraq or Afghanistan, things that are in living memory, and nothing wrong with that. Obviously, those are very important things that need to be remembered and commemorated. But it's easy to sort of to lose track again of that wider picture, that suffering, as it were, that pain, that humanity is transcendent. It is the core element of warfare throughout history. Whether you have lines of Romans with their shields and their swords bashing against it, or whether it's, red coats and blue coats marching against one another, or nowadays it's regardless of what the people are wearing or why they're fighting or how they're fighting, at the end of the day, it's that core human experience. And so what the book, I hope, does is tackle that issue from a variety of different points to help us expand the way that we're thinking about these questions. So again, one of the articles is all about the Arctic convoys in the Second World War. Without getting too much into the details of it, the entire gist is that when the Germans invade the Soviet Union, they do pretty well at first. Things are really rough for the Soviets. They need supplies. They need a lot of materials because they're hightailing all their industry way east to make sure it doesn't get captured. So the British and the Americans put together this crazy plan, like, okay, we got to get tanks and planes and medical equipment over to these people as best we can. Well, what if we can't go through the Mediterranean, we can't go through the Pacific, what if we went up around all the fjords and whatnot of Norway, Scandinavia, through those frozen waters where there's like little inlets that are almost impossible to navigate, and we can bring supplies to them that way. And again, that's not really the point of why we're here, but so without getting too much into it though, the conditions of those convoys, harrowing. They were horrible. The physical difficulties that just came with the environment alone, let alone the threat from enemy action, is extraordinary. And it's something that's oftentimes forgotten because it's a bit of a sideshow when you compare it to the Battle of Stalingrad or something. Right. So, so that's one aspect of the book. What I found reading through that is a great deal of parallels with another article, which is all about the Crimean War, so a European conflict in the 1850s between France and Britain and Russia on the other side. And during a siege in that war, Siege of Sebastopol, there was basically a hurricane that hit the British and French armies, and they were thoroughly unprepared for it. And just the way that a lot of these men are writing about these experiences, writing about, in one case, the mud, and in another case, the ice, how similar they could be sometimes, and how, I think that if you got all these people into one central room, they would have a lot of things in common.
Right.
Completely different conflicts, completely different environments, right? Completely different means and causes of warfare, all of it. And yet, at their core is a singular experience, right? It's something that they could relate with. I think a very similar thing with, for example, one of the articles is it's all about a British soldier named Roger Lamb, who fought through the American War of Independence, and all the things that he saw, and how similar so many of his quotations were from my article in the War of 1812, or in another article about campaigning in India during the early 19th century. It's just that I think the more and more that you read through them, the more the parallels make sense, as it were.
Doing this, I'm thinking of the generals and the people that give the orders.
Yeah.
Because if you have a troop, that could be hundreds of people.
Thousands.
Yeah. Do you think, what does it take for them to give that order? What does it, in World War II, we always see D-Day.
Yeah.
And they're giving the order for people to, when they open the boat, they're sitting ducks.
It's terrifying.
How do they, what's the makeup? How would you analyze the makeup of the person that has to said,
so
ready, go?
I mean, as far as a psychological analysis, I think that sort of thing is a little beyond me. And I mean, ultimately, I'm a historian. I've never been in combat, and so there's going to be that inherent divide that I will never be able to cross, and hopefully, I never have to cross it. Right. So I understand that, right?
Yeah.
But still, I think it's important that we listen to the words of the people who were there, what they tell us about those experiences. All the articles, it's very much at their core is what are the individuals who were there telling us. I don't want to hear about the historian's conjecture. I want to hear the primary sources, what they're saying to us. It's this horrible kind of arithmetic. It's so easy a lot of times in history that we can write off, oh, well, this general was a butcher. He hated the soldiers for this, that, the other.
Yeah.
It's very rarely the case, I find, at least in my experience and my belief. It's especially as warfare becomes more and more modern, more and more mechanized and whatnot.
Right.
You see situations where, like say in the First World War, there's no such thing on the Western Front as outflanking the enemy because it's just a single continuous front line. You can't go around anywhere. And so we need to take that hill, can't sneak around it. We can't hit them at nighttime. We can't hit them with this kind of, we've tried all these different techniques to make it work. The only thing left is that you hit them with as much stuff as possible and you charge and you go. And so you have this weird system where you can have, it's part of the calculus, isn't it? It's an arithmetic where, all right, we expect approximately 10,000 men in the push. About 5 or 10% of that will be to our own fire, because if we stop firing with the artillery before our boys get there, well, that means that the Germans will pop up and they'll start shooting. It was quite literally it's like a formulaic approach of, right, how many of our own people are we able to kill
Friendly
by
fire.
the artillery before we stop firing and let the Germans counterattack?
Yeah.
Like it's I think this is why, right? It's reasons like that are why, at the end of the day, regardless of the causes of the war, right? Well, let's take, for example, the Second World War. It's very clean cut. I think we can all agree.
Yeah.
Controversial statement.
Yeah. No.
We're probably on the good side in World War II.
Yes.
Germany, not really, not the best
I think
place.
we can agree on
we
that.
can agree on that
yes.
one. But at the end of the day, regardless of why the war is being fought, even if you're a young German kid or whatever, and even if you fervently believe in the cause, right? Going through those experiences, right? Being a part of it, good side, bad side, whatever, it is a particular form of hell, the way that it
Yeah.
changes the way the mind works, the things that it puts you through, the privations, the trauma, the horror. And I think that at its core, that is something that at least needs to be understood. War is a very
Yes.
heavy thing.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that all war is bad. Again, there are righteous conflicts. We need to stop the Nazis. We need to
Right.
defend
Life,
people,
yes.
defend life. We need to liberate place,
Yeah.
whatever it is. But at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that it is a pleasant experience. We're going to liberate France. It doesn't mean it's a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
We're going to beat back the Nazis on D-Day. That doesn't mean that when Eisenhower signs the order that's going to condemn thousands of young men to their deaths,
death.
that it's a
Yeah.
pleasant, happy,
Yeah.
photo op kind of thing to do. Actually, it's in like the little prelude into the book and the back of the book, I talk about how regardless of, all of those material circumstances, the book seeks not to judge, it seeks not to condemn or praise, merely to understand
Yeah.
on these historical figures' own terms, on their level, what were they experiencing?
Is
I'm
that
not
hard?
interested.
Is that hard for you to do?
I think it is.
It is.
So my chosen article is a fairly easy topic. It was, the War of 1812. There's not quite as much weight to that
Yeah.
these days. But for example, one of the articles, a brilliant man, Dr. Robbie McNiven, he's Scottish, so the name pronunciations get kind of weird. But Robbie
Yeah.
wrote an amazing article called I Strike No One Dead, which is about a massacre, as I said, on the American frontier of Moravian Native Americans. These were natives who were
Yeah.
Christian converts living in the Ohio frontier. And for a variety of different reasons, for political, racial, economic, social, all these different things, there was a massacre. A group of American militiamen during the American War of Independence, the guys fighting for freedom,
Yeah.
they went to a town and they systematically murdered
Yes.
a lot of
Yeah.
not just men, but women and children.
Yeah. What was the name of that?
Nadenhuten
Okay.
is the name of the massacre.
Okay.
I Strike No One Dead. It's the second article in the book. It gets into some very heavy stuff.
I bet.
Very heavy
Yeah.
stuff. Actually, that there's quite a lot of parallels I find to, say, Holocaust history, to Eastern Europe and the Second World War. But it's. I think that he strikes that balance very well. Of, obviously this is a terrible thing. We're not here to justify it. We're not here to explain it away, because you can't do that, right? It doesn't make it okay. Clubbing, I won't get into
Right,
details, but
right,
doing bad
right.
things,
Yeah. Right.
nothing ultimately justifies it. But there's also a very fascinating moment in the book where he talks about how one of the people who was responsible for, or one of the people who did the massacre, was a kid. At least how we would today describe him.
Right. Right.
Back
right.
in the day, he was a man.
He
but
was right.
to us, he's a very young person.
Yeah.
And how after he's done doing all these murders, he breaks down crying.
Yeah.
Because, well, why was he there? Because he lost a couple of family members himself to a native raid. Not the same natives, different group
Right.
entirely.
So
But he wasn't thinking through that necessarily.
Right.
And in his mind, this was going to make it right.
Right.
But at the end, he broke down crying and
he
he realized,
realized.
I don't feel better. This
Right.
didn't lessen the pain of the loss that I experienced.
So in a way, well, not in a way. I guess it is what they come home with every war, if you survive it,
Yeah.
is PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And to touch on that, I mean, you have to have it writing it. What you didn't tell me spoke volumes, truthfully.
Mm-hmm.
That has to affect you some way. So here we are, how many wars later, and we're still fighting wars, and we're still doing this. Isn't there a better way? I know people fight for land, they fight for religion. I just feel like, isn't there a better way? And maybe
One
the
would.
book, in actual fact, will break into that and be a peaceful way to say, what can we do better? And I'm seeing from an inside, I want you to keep talking. So I want you to take it
No,
away. Take it away, really. I mean,
I certainly, that would be lovely. I think it'd be very nice. As far as aims for the book going forward, this is volume 1.
okay.
I hope that it will become a long-running series.
Me too.
Commercial viability is an important thing. But this the first book, it really does feature a lot of contributions, largely Anglo-American, British or American things,
Yeah.
and primarily it's the early modern era up to the Second World War. But in future, I very much want to bring in a wider variety of voices. I want to bring in people all the way from ancient history,
Yeah.
Romans and Greeks and
Yeah.
whatnot, same themes, same importance, all the way up to modern day events. I want to bring in veterans, individuals who experience these things firsthand, where perhaps there is a little bit more political weight. And I think that when you do so, again, it really helps to bring together, it helps to emphasize to the reader the weight that is, the moral weight of warfare and conflict. And perhaps, in that way, if I may be so bold, hopefully it helps individuals to understand, again, not necessarily saying that, we can never go to war, ever. It's bad. Sometimes it's necessary. We live in a material world
Right.
where nation states need to do what they need to do.
Right.
But it should never, ever, ever be a decision that is taken lightly.
That's right.
It is a very heavy, it's a very important thing, because ultimately, regardless of how right you are, it's not a fun time. It's
Right.
never a good.
And it can never be avoidable. It's not avoidable.
Yeah. And so I think that ultimately, as the series progresses, as I bring in more and more voices and try to capture more modern ideals as well, that's something that we really want to push for.
Yeah.
Not just the military side of things as well, but the civilian side of things. Individuals who know people who have gone to war and how that is how it's affected them.
Right.
Well, et cetera, et cetera.
And I asked this question, I actually kind of know the answer, because they say women in war, but women have been involved in war.
Oh, yes, exactly.
Not just as medics and things like that. They've actually been involved.
Yeah.
And do you have any of their stories, or?
So unfortunately, the first volume really doesn't have much
Yeah.
by way of
Yeah.
the women's perspective. There are a few. There's a woman, for example, in the Crimean War, Mrs. Frances Dubberly, I believe was her name, who was there. She was a camp follower, which means that she was
Right.
there with the troops,
Yeah.
with her husband in battle, well, not in battle, but
But-
on campaign, I
right,
should say.
right.
There's another instance of a woman having given birth in the camp around Sebastopol, the same place where that hurricane took place, things like that. And in future, I definitely want to get more and more into those stories so we can bring them to light. I'd love to talk more.
I
but
know,
see
I'd
the
love you to
wrap-up
talk about
sign.
it. It's saying wrap up. The book is something like philosophy. It is absolutely wonderful. I am definitely going to order it through Native
appreciate
Oak
it.
Publications.
Yes, nativeoak.org.
nativeoak.org, and Brandon F. He is on YouTube. Look him up and buy the book. Especially, it's. I look forward to the series.
I
And
appreciate
thank
that.
you so much for joining us. You really gave an insightful look at war. Thank you.
Thank you so much.